Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, The Grimm Reader, and this is going to be episode, I will have to check the number, I will put it down in the little description for what number it is. Well, it's for week 27, so I guess it is episode 27. This channel has now apparently turned into a Wednesday to Wednesday channel for right now. We're just going to go with it. And yes, I'm still kind of getting used to the new setup here. Deliberately kind of holding off on filling up the bookshelves, and I also have fewer bookshelves. I don't have these ones that I used to have here anymore on purpose, because I'm noticing how having more space is nice. It feels right now, and which means that there are a lot of books to be put in places or given away. And the first bit of news is that tomorrow, for the first time, I'm actually going to be volunteering, helping the Friends of the local library set up for the next sale. And of course, you can be sure that one of the reasons I'm volunteering is to see if I get first dibs on if anything looks good to me. I'm assuming they'll let me at least pay for, if I see something that I want, I would pay for it. But you want to see what there is, even though I have a lot of books. But I'm sure you all understand that just because we have a lot of books doesn't mean we want to stop looking for other new ones. So everything's going well in my reading. We're still getting used to everything. I cannot believe it was only a week ago that I was speaking to you from the office, all frazzled with the situation with the cats, and now we're all back to normal, more or less, except not really, because it's all different. I have wood floors as opposed to carpet, and I'm trying to keep them nice and clean. It does involve regular keeping up of the sweeping when you have cats. Don't fall down. Yeah, everything's going quite well with the reading. Continuing on with Anna Karenina, and I know I always promise you a more in-depth one, talk about it, and I was kind of going to do that, but I think I'm still going to hold off. I'm collecting sort of quotes. So I think just in general, so when people say they love the novel, I really think we love Tolstoy, perhaps all of Tolstoy, because his characters are so wonderful, and he's able to depict them in such a sort of endearing way. Even people we don't like are interesting. And one person I'm sort of having, I know Brian was talking about crushes. I'm not sure if it's a crush, but it's more like a sort of, well, maybe it's a crush. I don't know. Getting to the definition of what a crush actually is. But the character of Levine, who's just gotten married, and he's just so interesting to me as a character, and I do kind of like him, Levine, and I have been dabbling in other social medias. I almost feel like it's like committing adultery, so I've been on the TikTok a little bit, and there was this funny TikTok where someone sort of was saying how they hate all the characters, and then they sort of honed it on with music, as TikTok does, how they liked Levine. He's the guy, kind of, and I feel the same way. And I will get back to you with more in depth, with sort of a description of some of the things he does to when they keep saying how he endears us to him because of the way he depicts the characters. I'll give you an example of that, but not this week, I don't think. I read one more fairy tale in my short book that should be going a bit quicker, but it's not, about Lev Karyuhan's fairy tales based in Japan, and it was good. No, actually, I guess I've read two short ones. The Legend of Fugen Bosatsu, which is interesting, and then the other one that I read, The Screen Maiden, where the person comes to life. Yes, I'll have to, some of them are very short and I'll have to go back to it. And yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that for that one for now, but it's going well. And then The Stand, oh my gosh, The Stand. I mean, it is a dystopian novel, and so everything is kind of getting more and more obviously dystopian. And for some reason, he's like throwing in all these literary allusions. As the ones I've gathered are Yeats, The Things Are Falling Apart, The Santa Cannot Hold, and then I put on Instagram, and he quotes one of the first very memorable metaphors from Eliot's The Love Song of Alfred J. Prufrock, I think that's what it's called, J. Alfred Prufrock, about the patient etherized on a table and connecting it to the evening sky, which I always, when I read that, I was like, that is a weird metaphor. I mean, what? But I guess it's Eliot. And then it's at the beginning of this section of the novel. So I was like, King is getting literary on us, which is interesting. It's going well though, I do like it. It's a long novel. And then the other one is also going well. I'm trying to get to the end of the second Malazan book on the audio, so my husband can finally listen to it. It's still unrelentingly bleak. There's one character, female character, who's sort of turning into a version of Daenerys from Game of Thrones, just in terms of how people are viewing her and her twist. And she's an interesting character, Felicia, because she's sort of rather unlikable, but strong. And she's a young woman, and she's been sort of put upon in various ways one might expect by people in her environment, but yet she comes through. He's also good at characters. I mean, he's not Tolstoy, but that's not the kind of book it is. And so, I mean, even King, in a certain sense, you read King because of their characters. I mean, in a way, I guess, that is something that will keep me going with a book, is if I like the characters. Even if they're not that literary, it doesn't have to be literary. But if you like the characters, and King is actually pretty good at it. He has this sort of almost he can sort of do it in a very brief way. He'll have someone be described, or the way they speak or something, and you just kind of get a sense of he is actually really good at dialogue, I think, or just get the cadences of how people speak. I do like King. It's quite good. Anyway, so they're all going well, and the last things I want to talk about are just connected to some, indulge me here, but books I haven't read and probably won't read, but they're connected to my booktube viewing and just things I've been thinking about. So let's start with this novel that I'll insert a picture of here. It has, I'm sorry, I'm not even sure of the title anymore. It has sharks in the title. Kawai Strong Washburn. So he grew up in Hawaii, and I actually did start reading the book. So the first time I came across it was a while ago when Jer, our Finnish booktuber, really loved the book, and he gave a really nice review of it, and it made me interested in it, and so I went and started reading it. And I have to admit, I think a lot of people, and I think this is where the question of is it deception comes in, I'm not sure, assumed from the name and perhaps even, and here I'm treading on very sensitive ground, if we see a picture of him, not sure, so he was a native Hawaiian. So the term there is, it's also a very loaded term, is, and I'm not sure I'm going to say it, is Kanaka Maoli. So someone who is Polynesian, basically. And the novel, so I didn't really like the style that much. It was sort of overly poetic and took itself too seriously. It just wasn't really for me that much. And so I got a sample, and then it's like, I don't think I'm going to read this. But then sort of, as it turns out, and actually I remember sort of looking at his bio and looking at him, and for some reason, and then it turns out that he's not Kanaka. He grew up in Hawaii, and it always kind of reminds me a little bit of Obama, who also grew up on, well, perhaps, I think actually he was born, Kawai was born there, so, you know, he was born on the islands to basically American parents, black and white. So he is a person of color. So, but the whole question of identity is so complicated. So, you know, he's Hawaiian, but he's not Hawaiian. And so in the beginning my thinking on this book that I admittedly only read a few pages of, I sort of had this thing of, well, writers are allowed to write what they want to write, and it's fine if he wants to write about Hawaii and in a kind of the magical realism of the islands and the mythology. But the more I think about it, and the more I sort of thought about it, and I was watching, the reason why it's come back to my mind is I was watching That's So Poe. Sorry for forgetting her first name, but she had DNF'd the book after finding out that it's not really an own voices book in the sense of when we say own voices or indigenous. And there's another video that's sort of in between Jer and the booktuber from That's a Po, Roz, talked about this too. And in Roz's one, I actually remember commenting that I think it's less terrible for him to be doing this because he's a person of color. And now I'm even stepping back from that a bit, because I do think that if you, and it's really hard to tell from, I've been sort of rabbit holing a little bit in terms of interviews, and there is a bit of a backlash, and there was at least one Kanaka interviewee with him who really thought that he was being less than transparent about his own positionality in terms of being basically an American who grew up in Hawaii and was born there too. So he's first generation Hawaiian. You could say that, I guess, but he's not Polynesian, of Polynesian descent. And it gets into, and the more I think about it, if you read the novel, it really has that, apparently it is in the voice of an own voice's narrator. And so I do think that it would kind of have been better for him to be more overly like transparent about, look, I am who I am. I'm American. I grew up in Hawaii, and I love the culture, but I don't share that identity, even though I grew up close to it and observed it. And for some reason, he seems to have not wanted to do that. And some people are saying on purpose, because it's going to help the book. And that's where I don't really know. And I'm still I'm not quite sure what to think. So there's that book. And now we're getting into what else? So bringing it all back to guess who? Me. And also a video of Britta. Britta Böhler had just finished Sea People by Christina Thompson. So here we get into Maori, the Maori. And believe it or not, I am part Maori. I identify completely, obviously as a white person, obviously. But my ancestry is Maori. I'll insert a picture of my great-grandmother. And it's quite complicated. Well, it's not that complicated, but so Britta was reading Sea People, a book that's been around a lot on the booktubes, so people loved it, and I do want to read it. But because I sort of have a hard time with nonfiction anyway, I'm going to go back to her memoir, Christina Thompson's memoir of meeting her future husband and her connections to New Zealand. And her husband is Maori. And so the Maori story is also very complex and very complicated. And I've already read one review of her first book, which has the title, it's a quote from apparently some, the Maoris had this, were quite warfaring and were suspicious of the white man, why wouldn't they be? And there's this quote about, if you come ashore, we will murder you. And that's the title of her first book. And it's about her own story, but also the story of New Zealand, I guess, early New Zealand, as opposed to Sea People, which is more like all of Polynesia. Also very interesting. And so so my history with you look at me and like, Maori, really? You? German person? Yes. And so the issue here is, if you go back into, even in the first pages of that book, she mentions, I think she uses the word harem scarum or some kind of funny adjective for this early settler called Frederick Manning. And I will insert a picture of him here too. Frederick Manning, Irish, travels to New Zealand, gets sort of friendly with one of the tribes, the Ngāpuhi tribe, and marries a Maori princess. And he is my third great-grandfather, Frederick Manning, and the princess's name is Moengaroa. Moengaroa, I don't really have a picture of her, I wish I did, but and so there's this history of, and he's even referred to as a Pakeha Maori, so a white Maori. He's not Maori, he's white, Pakeha. I think, and my pronunciation may be completely, it's sort of, I don't speak Maori, I wish I did, I would like to learn the language. So Pakeha is white and Maori, so he's a Pakeha Maori, adopted by this tribe. Unfortunately, and I really would like to, I do have his book, Old New Zealand. Let me just get through that, which I got. It's one of these books that you can get published, they'll publish it for you. So this is the book he wrote, which I've also only dipped into. I haven't read it, but it's his account of, you know, New Zealand, and I really should read it. Pakeha comes up a lot, the term. And so there's a lot of what happens a lot, and it happens. So his son Haraki, yeah, I think his name is Haraki. No, am I getting that right? I forget his name. Something with age. Haraki. So my great-great-grandfather was very young, and he had a child with Sarah Cochrane, who's also very young. So at least both of them were very young. But what I see in my tree a lot are very older white men, often Irish, British, Irish, who have children with young Maori women, very young. Like there's one, like even, I mean, the so the mother of, you know, Haraki's, the next generation down, she was very young. She's 14 or something, I don't know. And so there is that history of that's quite common. I mean, it's common all over the world. Older men, younger women. But in this case, you have the white, non-white intersection. And so it's interesting. So with Christina Thompson, a white woman from America marrying a Maori man, I've already read one, I think, New Zealand-based review. It was very dismissive of the book. And it accuses her of exoticizing her husband and having him stand in for all the Maori to him, which, you know, I'm going to read the book and get back to you on all of that. But at least in this case, what's interesting to me is that it's, you know, it's present day, and it's also a woman marrying a Maori man, so white woman, Maori man, as opposed to what seems to be more often the case, which is also kind of interesting. So I guess these questions of identity are in my mind. And there's one other book which doesn't really relate to the identity stuff that I've sort of started and decided not to go on with, but let me end the identity chit chat. So I'll end with sort of another article that I came across that I wanted to see if you've read, and I'm going to reread it more closely, in the Atlantic, called Identity Hoaxes. So there's these people who, almost like Munchausen in terms of identity, they'll adopt a sort of oppressed identity, like Rachel Dolezal, who goes by a different name now. They made a movie about her, who claims that she's black, and she was completely not black. But this has happened quite a bit in academia. There have been these cases of women, usually sometimes men, but it seems to be more women, adopting the identity of a person of color, and they're not that. And then it comes out, and then sometimes, in one case at least, the graduate student kind of realized her mistake and has at least reflected on it a little bit. And so I think a lot, and you know, it even reminds me of the whole thing with Elizabeth Warren, all very complicated. So yeah, that's sort of stuff that's going on in the atmosphere right now. And I'll end with the last book that I'm also probably not going to finish, and it's connected to Karenina, and it's another booktuber. Olive gave us her top 10 top reads of 21 so far, and it was really wonderfully entertaining video. I'll link to it below. But the book her favorite book was called Hausfrau, and so I had a housewife in German, and it's all about this sort of disaffected young American woman, fairly young. Actually, that's one thing that put me off, is that there's this phrase about how she comes across people who are 10 years younger, and it turns out she's an old, withered 37-year-old, which just seemed kind of silly to me as someone who's 20 years older than that. But anyway, that's just sort of, just when I see something like that, I just sort of think, well, that book is for a different audience. It's for a younger audience, but it is a little bit silly. So it's a little bit, it's Anna Karenina like, or it's a retelling of Karenina, because she's also, and also Bovary, you know, Madame Bovary. She's bored, she's not happy in her marriage. But to me, so she's in Zurich, and she's in one of these beautiful little towns along the Zurich lake. And I've actually visited one of them, visiting an expat friend once, and we went to Zurich. And so I do know the area a little bit. I have been there. And maybe that's already enough for me to be sort of like, okay, you know, the othering, or sort of, she's an other in this Swiss society. But I just wasn't that impressed with the prose, and even her character. the writer wasn't able to get me to be interested enough in her right off the bat in the way that Tolstoy does. And it is a tall order to go up against someone like Tolstoy. On the other hand, I don't think I'm that picky. I think, part of me wants to go back to it, but the whole sort of, she's not learning German. She's in this extremely privileged environment. She has a nice life, but she hates it all and she thinks it's all very boring. So I guess the external stuff is all there. You know, she's privileged. She's in this beautiful town, and yet she's unhappy and depressed. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that, and also couldn't convince me that that is interesting. But this author hasn't done that yet, or hadn't done that yet. And she's sort of, you know, she's having affairs and with people from the class that she's taking, and it's just sort of, well, I'm not interested in her. I'm not interested in her, or not enough to keep going. So I probably won't. I might come back to it just because sort of I am interested in the Karenina aspects of it. We'll see. It's called Hausfrau. I'll put it in. And also I have to say that the cover, I thought the cover was so pretty that I thought, well, that's a, you know, and also the topic, because it's about the language, learning, like not knowing German. And I wonder if it'll thematize the fact that, well, she's in Switzerland, which, you know, has German, French, and other languages. And also Swiss German is not German. It's quite different, yet the dialect. So, you know, maybe I should stick with it just because of the language stuff. That's kind of why I decided to read it, or start reading it. So yeah, I've started a few things. I'm continuing with other things. I'm thinking about all these issues. And yeah, I'd like to hear what you're all reading, and I will report back probably next Wednesday. We'll see how things go. Bye-bye.